Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. First off, I'd like to thank you for your patience, as this video has been requested quite a bit. It's finally time to dive into the lore of Tsukihime, which is a bit strange, considering Tsukihime's visual novel predates the Fate Stay series and establishes a lot of key concepts for the nasuverse. To contend with that, I'll be going over the foundation of the nasuverse in even better detail than I've ever done before. The goal of this video is to make the complicated fiction of Type Moon more accessible and easily understood by framing things in the context I understand them from. That said, there will be spoilers, so consider yourself warned. If you want to experience Tsukihime firsthand, then it's been available for quite some time thanks to Mirror Moon's translation. It's a great read. Without further ado, let's jump on in. Tsukihime, Kata no Kyokai, and Fate Stay Night all exist more or less in the same extended universe. But Tsukihime profoundly involves the most fundamental aspects. The literal universe in the nasuverse is much like our own at first glance, with the vastness of space littered with stars and planets, but has some key differences. For starters, everything that exists, even time itself, comes from a single source, the swirl of the root, also called Akasha, a metaphysical location beyond mortal comprehension. It's considered outside the world, whereas most activity in the universe takes place in the world itself. Another huge component is that the celestial bodies, like moons, stars, and planets, essentially have souls, with their own will and powers. You could say planets are alive, teeming with vitality through mana. Of all the celestial bodies, 8 of them have individual beings that embody them. These 8 beings are called the ultimate ones: Type Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and of course, Type Moon. However, most all stories in the nasuverse take place on Earth, which doesn't have an ultimate one. It merely has a will of its own, Gaia. The will of Gaia seeks to keep the Earth itself protected from all threats, emphasizing nature above all else, and utilizing a powerful defense mechanism called the counter or deterrent force. Originally, Earth was home to many different creatures, not just humans and animals, but also phantasmal species such as elementals, fairies, spirits, and gods. Of them, however, humans became a danger to the planet, and Gaia lacked the ability to contain humanity's threat to Earth's future. Of course, as humans were a part of the planet, their collective will is also part of Gaia via a second will called Alaya. Over time, Alaya began to separate from Gaia, causing the planet's wills to conflict with each other. Instead of creating spirits and phantasmal beings to protect the planet, Alaya's counterforce involves the Counter-Guardian system, recording the legends of great humans and those who formed a pact with the planet in order to summon them as heroic spirits to protect humanity from extinction. Becoming overpowered by Alaya, Gaia calls out to the Ultimate Ones for assistance. The one to answer that call is Type Moon, also known as Brunstud of the Crimson Moon, who, in exchange for getting to live on Earth, would provide the planet protection against humans via a new species called the True Ancestors. Based in the Crimson Moon's image, the True Ancestors were a powerful vampiric race, incarnated from nature spirits. The True Ancestors were anti-human entities tasked with returning Earth to its original form before humans corrupted it by presiding over mankind. They were more than capable of it too, able to shape the world around them with only their thoughts, and able to control human behavior with their mystic eyes of enchantment. They appear to be an awesome elite force for the planet, but they certainly had one hell of a design flaw: vampiric impulses. Based off the Crimson Moon, the True Ancestors had a psychological urge to consume blood, and, of course, some of them succumbed to those impulses, turning into what are called demon lords, who gained a physical compulsion for blood, posing a threat to both the planet and themselves. As they did not suppress their urges, they could fully implement their powers, and did so to wipe out most of the True Ancestors. The remaining True Ancestors gathered to cause the birth of Arcuade Brunstud, a female ancestor with improved abilities, as a weapon to defeat the demon lords. She was hailed as the princess of the true ancestors, and over many years, she succeeded in eliminating all of her targets. Yet, another problem remained, one regarding humans. When demon lords or ancestors consume the blood of humans, those humans become vampires themselves, dead apostles that can live perpetually so long as they continue sucking blood, else they fall apart. Essentially, Arkoade exists in order to clean up the mess of her creators, which she does by resting for years in the Millennium Castle Brunstad between sightings of major dead apostles. She wakes up and arrives in town prior to Tsukihime in order to hunt down one such beast. Now, let's back up a bit and discuss some more fundamentals. If you've seen Fate Zero, then you know that there are mages who can manipulate the world around them with their mana, and there are some who have set their goals on reaching the root to experience a higher form of existence. This is impressive, but nowhere nearly as impressive as what's called true magic. You see, those that reach the root, but do not touch it, attain what is called true magic, that easily surpasses anything capable through standard magecraft. To date, there have been 5 such instances of mages acquiring true magic. Little is known about the first magic, but we're quite familiar with the third magic by now. It's Heaven's Feel, a magic used by the Ainsburn family to set up the system for the Holy Grail Wars by materializing the souls of heroes from the Throne of Heroes. What we'll be focused on, however, is the second magic, attained by Kiesher Zelrech Schweinorg, a magus turned magician after reaching the root and not touching it. This gave him the ability to operate parallel worlds. As such, he wielded what is called the Jeweled Sword Zelrech, a blade capable of launching energy absorbed from parallel universes. This plays a major role in the Heaven's Feel route of Fate Stay Night. It's good shit. Zelrech himself is practically immortal, having lived for over 800 years and appearing during many great events during human history. He's considered so important that he actually attended Arkoade's coronation of sorts. Let's hop back to Brunstad of the Crimson Moon. In exchange for gifting Earth with the true ancestors, he was allowed to live on Earth. He spent his days challenging powerful opponents to duels before amassing supporters so that he could take over the Earth as his own. Basically, the dude's become nothing but trouble. I brought up Zelrech before because, as things turn out, he was the one to finally slay Brunstad of the Crimson Moon. During the fight, he too was bitten though, and continues to assist humanity while in a weakened vampiric state. This guy's crazy, I tell ya. It's surprising how little screen time is devoted to a man so accomplished. By the time we reach Tsukihime, all the demon lords are gone, and Arkoade is the last surviving true ancestor who continues to hunt dead apostles. Prior to that, she had run-ins with the demon lords, also called the 27 dead apostle ancestors. One of them was her own older sister, Altruge Brunstad. During their fight, Altruge stole Arkoade's long hair. There are 2 main antagonists in Tsukihime, and I'll start with the most significant, Michael Roa Valdemyong. He was a priest of the church, an influential one at that. During his time with the church, he formed the Burial Agency, a special group of inquisitors tasked with hunting demons. His real goal, however, was to attain immortality, so he left the church to study at the Mages Association. He was aware that he could become immortal if he became a dead apostle, but he also knew it was kind of a shit deal, an immortality that would only last if he continued to devour blood. Nonetheless, it was still his best option, and he searched for a way to become one. Luckily for him, he was able to meet Arkoade, and he fell in love with her. He noticed she was struggling to restrain her vampiric impulses, not yet aware she even had them. So he provoked her until she sucked his blood and killed him. He revived as a dead apostle and rose among their ranks, until Arkoade's older sister came to punish him. Because he had gained some of Arkoade's power from being bit, he was powerful enough to defeat Altruge and all the remaining true ancestors. He was hunted by Arkoade and the church from then on, being killed and reincarnating 15 times. His next incarnation is very important. In 1976 France, a French Asian girl named Alicia was born with a strong capacity for magic. She lived peacefully and happily until she reached her 16th birthday and began to manifest as Roa's next vessel. The process made her crave murder and despair, and over time, she became master of her village, playing with the people's lives. While brutal, it wasn't long until Arcuate hunted her down and killed her. Her dead body was entrusted to the church, who managed to revive her without Roa's influence. That said, because she was still connected to Roa, she gained a form of immortality that would last as long as Roa remained alive. As part of an experiment, the church killed her again and again for an entire month. In the end, she was placed with the burial agency with the mission of hunting down Roa and ending her immortality. This girl is also called Ciel, and by the start of Tsukihime's story, she had come into town to eliminate Roa's newest incarnation. The other big baddie is Nerversker. Just kidding. His name's Nero Chaos, a dead apostle who's been around for over a millennium, consuming various living creatures, accumulating them into his void-like body. In fact, he didn't become a dead apostle through normal means. He used his magical research to find a way to merge himself with other critters, and this put him on the same tier as someone bit by a true ancestor. The original guy, Fabro Rowan, was trying to become immortal, but as he merged with different creatures, his mind became lost to the collective will of all the living beings in his chaos. When we see him in the story, he's pretty much a giant collective consciousness who travels around at night, devouring even more victims. He has an ability to let the creatures he consumes out of the chaos to hunt, scout, or otherwise assist him like familiars. While it's Arcuate's job to hunt dead apostles like him, she wasn't actively seeking him out when he shows up, and is more an incidental foe. Now let's talk about Tsukihime's protagonist, Shiki Tono. He's introduced to us as a character who had been in a car accident as a child, and has never been the same since. Of course, that's a big-ass lie. No car wreck, but rather something much crazier happened. First off, Shiki's not even a Tono by blood. His original name was Shiki Nanaya, and he was to be heir to his family of demon hunters. Turns out this was a problem for the Tono family, who had a demon bloodline. The big daddy of the Tono family, Makihisa Tono, ordered a powerful demonic man, Koma Kishima, to murder the entire Nanaya family. Turns out, little old Shiki managed to survive the assault. Makihisa Tono had 2 children, a daughter named Akiha, and a son who was also named Shiki. This, practically on a whim, provoked him to adopt Shiki into the family. Now, in Japanese, they have the same name, but each is spelled with different kanji. In the West, this is usually conveyed by spelling Makihisa's real son with capital letters. For our purposes, I'll continue referring to our protagonist as Shiki Nanaya for now. Being a prestigious family with demon heritage, it's not too surprising that Roa, our big baddie's latest incarnation, happens to be, in fact, Shiki Tono, the true son of the Tono family. Just like when he incarnated into Ciel, Roa's soul stays dormant inside Shiki until he matures. Now, I mentioned that the Tono family has demon blood in their veins. It's not like they're inherently evil because of that, but it means they can invert, which is essentially succumbing to their demonic urges. The Tono family tries to keep this in check, and it's the head of the family's duty to eliminate anyone in the family who inverts. This is important because 8 years prior to the start of the visual novel, both Shikis and Akiha were playing together outside the Tono mansion, when Shiki Tono lost his sanity and suddenly attacked Akiha with a knife. Shiki Nanaya jumps in the way to save her, and is in turn scarred across the chest. As such, Makihisa was duty-bound to murder his own son for inverting. Tough break. This left both Shikis bleeding to death. Akiha stepped in and saved Shiki Nanaya by sharing with him half of her life force. In order to survive, Shiki Tono then stole Nanaya's life force, such that neither of them actually died. Shiki Tono was taken away, while Shiki Nanaya was hospitalized for his wounds. When Nanaya came to, however, his world was not the same. He saw these strange lines across everything, both objects and humans. By slicing along these lines, he would instantly destroy whatever those lines belonged to. The ability he gained, of course, was the mystic eyes of death perception, a miracle from Akasha, that was very similar to Ryogi Shiki's from Kara no Kyokai, but functions slightly differently in how it's used. This took its toll on Shiki, as there was no one who'd believe or support him. After a couple of days, Shiki managed to sneak out of the hospital. While outside, he encountered a talented magus, Alko Aozaki, who actually believed in him when he told her about the lines. In Tsukihime, Alko plays a fairly minor role, but let's talk a bit about her so she's not an enigma. When we see her in Tsukihime, Alko is the heir to the Aozaki mage family. Originally, her sister, Toko, whom you may have seen in Kara no Kyokai, was to be the heir, but that fell through. Aoko's grandfather had once opened a path to the root and obtained the fifth magic, thus making Aoko the new keeper of the fifth magic. More details about her life can be found via the visual novel Mahotsukai no Yoru, which is yet to be fully translated. What's important for our purposes is that she's a talented and infamous magus by the time she meets Shiki. When Shiki demonstrated his destructive eyes for her, she reprimanded him and taught him the value of living things. By the end of their visits, she even gave Shiki a special pair of glasses she stole from her sister and modified to be indestructible. The glasses allow Shiki to see normally while wearing them, so he could live life without going insane from seeing the lines all the time. Before parting ways, Aoko told Shiki to be true to his heart as a general life lesson. Now, the premise of Tsukihime is that Shiki, the adopted Tono child, had been living away from the Tono household for 8 years and is finally going to return now that his adopted father, Makihisa, had kicked the bucket. During those 8 years, he lived with the Arima family on the other side of town. He was cared for by an informal doctor, Sogen Jinan, who helped him deal with cases of anemia that plagued him since the accident. Shiki's body was pretty broken in a number of ways. Even though his scar had healed, he was still weak because his life force was being drawn upon by his brother. And, to add insult to injury, having the mystic eyes of death perception meant that he was always close to death himself. In truth, he didn't realize any of this, and just thinks it's chronic anemia. His memories of the Tono household were scattered and incoherent, and he doesn't recall his nature as a demon hunter, despite being adopted into a family with demon blood. This is because Makihisa brainwashed Shiki before sending him away. The whole thing seems funky, yeah? Well, it gets worse. The surviving members of the Tono household are Akiha and her 2 maids, Kohaku and Hisui. Turns out, they've all had their hardships. Let's start with Akiha, Shiki's adoptive sister. She's a very reserved girl due to having a sheltered upbringing. There were only few moments when she was allowed to play and live a normal life. And even then, that got screwed over once the big tragedy happened 8 years ago. She had sacrificed half of her life force to save Shiki Nanaya, so her body often struggles to compensate for her missing half. Unlike Shiki, Akiha still knows about the incident and keeps it a secret from him. While Shiki was away, living with the Arima family, Akiha was stuck in a boarding school and, despite her efforts, could not make contact with him. Once her father died, she was able to finally reach out to Shiki and have him return home. While she isn't always honest about showing it, Akiha loves him dearly, not as a brother, but as the boy who protected her. Makihisa, the head of the Tono family, was in network with other families that collectively work as a conglomerate of sorts. Since the Tonos had demon blood running through them, Makihisa also risked inverting if he couldn't keep his body under control. One of the branch families, the Fujo clan, had an ability to give others energy called synchronization, so he had Hisui and Kohaku, daughters of the clan, come live at the Tono mansion. Put bluntly, those with the power of synchronization can give others energy via sex. Of the 2 sisters, you could say Hisui was the lucky one, as she was never called upon to use her ability. Kohaku, on the other hand, was constantly raped by Makihisa, as this was the most efficient means of transferring her energy to him. This left Hisui to be a cheerful girl who encouraged Shiki Nanaya to come out and play, whilst Kohaku could only watch them from a distant window, instilling a false sense of hope. Kohaku felt envy when she watched Shiki dive forward to save Akiha, wondering why someone so kind was never there for her instead. Despite having very little contact with him, Kohaku gave Shiki her favorite white ribbon before he went away and made him promise to return it one day. Essentially, Her only semblance of early happiness was the hope that this kind boy would remember their promise and come back home. As they got older, Akiha and Hisui found out about the rapes, and Hisui in particular became severely depressed, so much so that her personality changed. Since Kohaku had endured Makihisa's abuse, Hisui was spared the same fate, and so she decided to remain pure by isolating herself to the Tono mansion, avoiding being touched by men. Kohaku decided to take on extra duties until her sister could become cheerful again. Basically, the two sisters swapped roles, based on an informal agreement. Kohaku, before this point, was pretty much a doll, sheltering her emotions as a defense mechanism from the abuse. So Hisui was surprised to see her sister acting joyfully as she once did. Hisui felt that she should remain the quiet one if it meant Kohaku could find happiness by role-playing as her. Though the smiles were fake, Kohaku continued to act cheerful, having no better identity to assume. Yeah, that's all kinds of fucked up. We're almost ready to dive into the main plot, but there's one last thing to touch upon. Makihisa, the filthy rapist bastard. How exactly did he die? Well, 8 years ago, when his biological son inverted and attacked Akiha, Makihisa found that he could not bring himself to kill his son, and instead had him imprisoned. Eventually, Makihisa gave Kohaku more freedom, but only in return for taking care of his son. By this, I mean she had to be raped not just by Makihisa, but also by the imprisoned Shiki. As would be expected, this brought Kohaku into a deep despair, vowing to get revenge on the entire Tono bloodline. Thus, she began brainwashing the imprisoned Shiki with medicinal herbs, causing him to ultimately murder his own father. He escapes captivity and becomes, depending on the plot route, almost fully controlled by Michael Roa Valdemyong. This, of course, leads Arkaway into town to hunt him down, and we finally reach the beginning of the game. Type Moon works are always this wild. Now, the plot structure of Tsukihime is a bit different from, say, Fate Stay Night. In it, your plot route is essentially the normal and true route for each of the game's heroines. A lot of the initial material is the same for all routes, but towards the end, they diverge dramatically. Let's start with Arkawade's route, as it's the first one you'll encounter. During this route, Shiki, the one with the Eyes of Death perception, finally returns home to the Tono mansion after 8 years. He has a lot of things he has to get used to, namely his table manners and being attended to by Hisui. Other than that, things are peachy. That is, until, on his way to school, he spots Arkawade out in public and is immediately overwhelmed with an instinct to kill her. This is meant to be confusing at first, but it makes a lot more sense when you consider that Shiki has remnant instincts from being a Nanaya child, a craving in his blood to kill inhuman beings, as well as impulses forced upon him by his connection to the other Shiki. In Arkawade's route in particular, Roa has the ability to manipulate Shiki Nanaya to an extent as well, provoking his Nanaya instincts even further. Roa's conflicted love for Arkawade manifests in the form of bloodlust. He influences Shiki Nanaya to pick up on Arkawade's vampiric presence, follow her home, and murder her in her apartment by cutting her death line and splitting her into 17 chunks. Awful, right? He thinks so too, throwing up, leaving the scene and passing out on his way home. He contemplates his spontaneous murder until, the next morning, he finds Arkawade waiting for him. Long story short, Arkawade, being a true ancestor, has the ability to heal herself, but is now in a compromised state due to all the energy she used. While she's supposed to be hunting dead apostles, she's really in no condition to fight anymore, so she employs Shiki to serve as her bodyguard until she regains her strength. The two of them team up and are later attacked by Nero Chaos, who had come to prove himself by killing Arkawade. As she's still not able to fight fully, Shiki steps up and defeats Nero with a new method of using his mystic eyes. Not only can he see death lines, but also specific points of death on his foes. After a very close battle, Shiki takes out all of Nero's many death points and wins the fight. Arkawade lets him know that Nero was never her original target, and so the two team up again to hunt down Roa's new incarnation. This leads Shiki to confront his brother, Roa's new vessel. He learns about the incident of his past and his true Nanaya instincts. He also falls in love with Arkawade. Arkawade leaves on her own to confront Roa and is seemingly killed in the process. Shiki arrives too late and finishes the job, killing Roa once and for all by severing his death point. The route ends on a bittersweet note, with Arkoade realizing that she can no longer restrain her vampiric impulses and ultimately returns to her castle to rest in solitude. Arkoade's other ending is similar, but they get to hang out a bit more before she goes. Ciel's route, on the other hand, takes things to a whole new level. We learn that Ciel highly suspects that Shiki is Roa's next reincarnation, and so she uses suggestion to infiltrate his school and monitor him. A lot of things happen just like in Arkoade's route, but the main difference here is that Ciel and Shiki actually wind up falling in love, despite Ciel's goal of killing Roa. After helping Arkoade kill Nero Chaos, Shiki convinces Ciel to team up in order to defeat Roa. They are attacked at school by Roa, aka Shiki Tono, and ultimately chase Tono out of the building, where he's killed by Arkoade. At first, all seems well, but it's important to note that Shiki Nanaya wasn't the one to defeat Roa, and so his existence was not fully destroyed. Thus, Roa begins to take over Shiki's body and mind. Shiki struggles to contain Roa's influence, but winds up turning to Ciel for help. Upon discovering that he's the new Roa, Ciel gears up to try and kill him. The two fight, but eventually Shiki calms Ciel, and they both decide to try and find a way to rid his body of Roa somehow. Arkoade, on the other hand, refuses to hand Roa over to the church, and so she insists that Roa be killed, and that she be the one to do it. She presents Shiki with a choice, a chance to become her servant, in exchange for the power to overcome Roa internally. This choice affects whether or not you get Ciel's good or true ending. But in each, Shiki is left with no choice but to use his mystic eyes on himself to kill Roa's existence. Either way, Roa is permanently killed, and Shiki lives happily with Ciel. The remaining plot routes are unique, in that neither Nero Chaos nor Roa actually appear. It's possible Roa's presence provokes Shiki Tono's demonic behavior, but he never fully manifests. On to Akiha's route, which I lovingly call the Sister Slammer story. Shiki never even properly meets Arkoade, so he never encounters Nero Chaos, and things play out quite differently. After returning to the Tono mansion, Shiki discovers that his classmate Satsuki was bit and turned into a vampire. We viewers know better though. She got bit by Shiki Tono. He wasn't a true ancestor though, so the humans he bit normally wouldn't have a form of consciousness. Satsuki did, and she continued to kill people every night in order to survive. When Shiki Nanaya confronts her, she expresses her love for him and tries to convert him into a vampire. Her bite doesn't affect him as he's already influenced by his brother. To put her out of her misery, he severs her death line. In this route, it becomes much clearer that Akiha has been struggling with her inversion impulse, resisting her Tono demon blood, which is particularly difficult because she has to support both her life and Shiki's. When it gets bad enough, Akiha will sometimes drink Kohaku's blood to restrain her impulses. Ever since Shiki killed Satsuki, he thought that the serial murders in town would stop, yet they don't. Instead, he has dreams in which he runs around the city and drinks people's blood. He soon begins to think his dreams are real and that he himself is the serial killer. In his dreams, he sees Ciel fighting him, so he approaches her at school to try to learn more. He tells her he feels he's a murderer, and in return, Ciel has Shiki go to school that night, where she fights him to the death, pushing him to the edge and provoking him to strike a final blow. Of course, this is just a test, a way for her to prove to him he's not a killer, and is instead dreaming about someone else. Furthermore, Ciel tells Shiki about his sister's demon blood, and he begins to reluctantly consider her to be the murderer. When he goes to confirm his suspicion, he and Akiha get attacked by Shiki Tono. Here, he's just an envious maniac who aims to force Akiha to succumb to her demon blood. Akiha gets injured during the encounter, and Shiki Tono escapes. Since that incident, Akiha's hair turns from black to red and won't turn back. Feeling guilty for always lying to Shiki Nanaya, Akiha comes clean with the full story. Shiki learns that he's adopted and that his brother is out to kill him. Acknowledging his love for Akiha, Shiki confesses, and the two get it on. Sadly, this romance is short-lived when Shiki Tono comes, kidnaps Akiha, and tries to convert her, making her into a lifeless doll of sorts. Nanaya steps in and fights against Tono to save Akiha, and While he does manage to eliminate Tono, he's forced to make a choice based on Akiha's condition. The choice is simple yet tragic. He could kill himself to return the half of her life force that she used to save him 8 years ago, allowing her more strength to restrain her demon blood. Or he could care for her in her doll-like state. If you choose the former, Shiki nearly kills his brother, but accidentally allows him to escape and head back to Akiha, who reacts by ripping his heart out and finishing him off. Faced with his hard decision, Shiki kills himself so that Akiha can both survive and return to normal. At the very end, Akiha returns to the garden and finds Shiki's knife and gets a feeling that he might not actually be dead. In her normal ending, Shiki spends the rest of his days allowing an emotionless, unresponsive Akiha to suck his blood every day, hoping that she may someday regain consciousness. Damn, that's depressing regardless of the outcome. Hisui's route is a tier higher in the crazy department. In it, Shiki gains faint memories from his childhood, remembering 2 twin sisters. One who would always play with him, and another who would always watch them from a window, never coming out. He recalls being given a ribbon from the isolated girl as a parting gift. Having returned to the Tono household, he suspects that Kohaku was the cheerful girl from his past, and Hisui was the one who gave him the ribbon. As such, he mistakenly returns the ribbon to Hisui. The same incident with Satsuki occurs, and Shiki even starts having similar dreams of going out into the city and murdering people. However, he doesn't turn to Ciel for assistance, and his dreams get worse and worse. Shiki's body turns weak, and he is stuck in bed for days on end, unable to move, all while having murderous nightmares, and even a dream in which he continually rapes a girl that looks suspiciously like Hisui. Eventually, we learn that what's really happening is that Shiki Tono, the one with the inverted Tono blood, is the one doing all the killing, and that experience is flowing into Shiki Nanaya in his sleep. Tono begins severely injuring himself, provoking Nanaya into fits of pain. Day by day, Nanaya loses all his sanity while bedridden. During the one day he gains the strength to move around, he stumbles to the Japanese house in the garden and witnesses Akiha sucking Kohaku's blood like before. Only now they're discussing that they need to put an end to Shiki Tono. Sadly, Nanaya, who at this point doesn't remember he's adopted, becomes paranoid that his own sister is going to kill him. In response, he locks himself in his room until Kohaku and Akiha head out to battle Tono. Eventually, Shiki opens the door for Hisui and discovers that she is actually the cheerful girl from his past, and not Kohaku. She explains that the others are out trying to kill Shiki's brother, and also that Shiki isn't expected to live through the night with so much drained energy. Hisui proposes that they exchange bodily fluids to activate her synchronization powers. They bang, giving Shiki enough energy to get out of bed and confront his adopted brother himself. The whole household faces off against Shiki Tono, but depending on your ending, the result differs. In Hisui's true ending, Tono goes in to strike at Kohaku, but Akiha jumps in the way and is impaled. Horrified by his actions, Tono runs away, but Nanaya tracks him down and severs his lines for a quick kill. Shiki Nanaya returns to Akiha, but her injury is too severe and she dies on sight. Shiki and the 2 maids resume living at the Tono mansion, until Kohaku calls Shiki out to a tree in the garden. Kohaku reveals that she was the mastermind behind Makihisa's death, Shiki Tono's escape, and even Akiha's untimely death. This means that only Shiki and Hisui still live at the mansion, but they are nevertheless content with this life, as Hisui vows to try and return to her more optimistic, cheery ways. Hisui's normal end has Kohaku push Akiha out of the way, so that only her arm is injured by Tono's attack. This doesn't change a whole lot, but Kohaku still invites Shiki Nanaya outside before revealing her crimes. She tries to kill herself, this time via poison, but Shiki uses his eyes to kill the poison in her system. This saves Kohaku, but she returns from the hospital without memories of her past. Shiki and Hisui make a couple, vowing to care for both Akiha and Kohaku. Of all the plot routes, Kohaku's is last. It starts out just like Hisui's route, with Shiki returning to the Tono mansion, wanting to give back the white ribbon. Like before, he assumes that, due to their personalities, Hisui is the girl who used to watch him from the window. However, he does not give the ribbon back because it seems Hisui no longer remembers his promise. Tipped off by the fact that Kohaku knew about the ribbon, Shiki interrogates Hisui and discovers she definitely isn't the girl who gave him the ribbon. Hisui begs Shiki not to tell Kohaku he figured out they had swapped roles, and he agrees at first. Apparently, Kohaku yearned to be outside with them as children, and finds joy in pretending to be her sister. Given the horrible things Makihisa did to her as a child, Shiki doesn't want to upset the peace they have now. One of the big deviations in the plot is that Akiha manages to kill Shiki Tono before Shiki Nanaya can have those murder dreams. The only dream he has from Tono's perspective is one in which he experiences Akiha killing him. Yet for some reason, he continues to have dreams where he goes out at night and sucks people's blood, and wonders whether or not he is actually committing those crimes. Turns out that when Akiha killed her brother, she did so to try and save Shiki Nanaya by returning the life force originally stolen from him. However, upon killing Shiki Tono, Akiha absorbs all of the energy into herself, and she has no way to return it. Furthermore, absorbing Tono's energy also meant she absorbs his inversion impulse, causing her to crave blood even more feverishly than before. Normally, she could restrain herself, but keeping Shiki Nanaya alive caused her too much stress. For the sake of her beloved adopted brother, Akiha becomes the one to go out at night and suck blood. For her, it was either let Shiki die or succumb to her demonic blood. Akiha struggles with this dilemma, keeping it a secret from Shiki, while she continues to lose control of his body. Now, at this point, Kohaku still feels her only goal in life is to seek revenge on the Tono family. So she actually provokes Shiki by drugging him and whispering to him in his sleep, convincing him he's the killer. This is an attempt to turn Shiki and Akiha against each other. Shiki's oblivious to this, instead realizing how much he loves Kohaku. Akiha tells him that she's still hunting for the murderer at night, but Kohaku later reveals that Akiha had already killed her target and had become a vampiric being herself. In shock, Shiki throws himself out of bed and visits Akiha in her room to learn the truth. Akiha admits that she had been lying to him, but only for his own good. She explains that she'll have to continue succumbing to her urges for his sake, and, due to her provoked life force, demands that Shiki love her back. Of course, in this route, Shiki's not a sister slammer, and loves Kohaku instead. So Akiha shows her dominance over him by simply willing the life force out of him. Essentially, Akiha's power is what keeps Shiki alive, so she can revoke that power as she wishes, and is now threatening Shiki to love her, or else he'll die. Still in love with Kohaku, Shiki plans to fight Akiha in futility. Before setting out, he confesses his love to Kohaku and gives back the ribbon, fulfilling their promise. Kohaku initially wanted to seek revenge on the Tono family, but now she's able to put that aside and pursue happiness with him. She reminds Shiki that she's a synchronizer, and that if they have sex, they can form a pact where she gives him the energy he needs to stand up against Akiha. They bang, I'll spare the details, and Kohaku wishes to save Shiki on her own. She slips a sleeping pill into his mouth and faces Akiha by herself. When Shiki wakes up, he stabs his fingertip to fight off the drowsiness and finds the two girls at his school in the middle of the night. Akiha is betrayed and outraged upon learning Shiki and Kohaku slept together. Despite there no longer being a need to become a demon, as Shiki can now survive with Kohaku's synchronizing ability, Akiha believes that she has already fallen too far and cannot return. She stabs Kohaku and proceeds to fight Shiki with her crimson hair that drains the heat from her enemies. He eventually catches her off guard and prepares for a final strike, only to realize he can't possibly kill his sister. Akiha tries to force him to kill her, pulling down his knife with her hair, but Kohaku steps in and stops them. You see, Akiha didn't kill Kohaku after all. She held back, which proves there is still hope for her. Akiha backs down and claims that she'll just have to accept that Shiki only loves her as a sibling. Kohaku supports Shiki's fragile life, allowing Akiha to gradually return to her normal self. Kohaku quits being a servant of the mansion and leaves, in part to search for Shiki's old home. Once she finds it, she sends for Shiki to visit her, and they live happily together. Completing all 9 plot routes of the game unlocks a special epilogue, The Eclipse, in which Shiki runs into Alko again after the events of the story. They talk about the things he accomplished and how he strove to live a moral life despite the strain it put on him. Alko points out that Shiki doesn't have much time left to live, and they talk about whether Shiki fears his imminent death. Ultimately, Shiki assures Alko that he had lived a happy life and is grateful to her for helping him as a child. The two part ways, and Tsukihime ends on a rather bittersweet note. Sure, that's the end of the visual novel, but you'd be wrong if you thought that was the end of the whole franchise. Nope. There's still the direct sequel, Kagetsu Tohya, as well as the fighting game Melty Blood. However, that's going to have to wait for another video. Look forward to a part 2 in the near future. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon, buying an official OtakuDaiKun t-shirt, or subscribing for more anime lists, reviews, discussions, lore videos, let's plays, and the holy waifu wars. Until next time, celebrate your fandom.